Right, let's hop on in. So, good morning. We are really happy that you are joining our first ever Educator in Residence recruitment webinar. My name is Chinwe Ohanale Agwu. My pronouns are she and hers. I serve as a senior program manager for the Michelson Intellectual Property Institute, a Michelson 20mm Foundation initiative. Now, for several years, this incredible initiative has been made possible in partnership with the National Association of Community College Entrepreneurship. This work that we're doing as educators and residents is really rooted in that partnership with NACE. This year, we're excited to open up the opportunity as wide as possible and hope that today's webinar will give you the tools that you need to be successful in the application process and then in the Educator in Residence program moving forward. We are super excited to partner with you through the Educator in Residence program to bring IP education to the next generation of creators, small business owners, innovators, and inventors. With your help, we can ensure that all people are prepared to harness the power of their creativity and make significant contributions to the lives of everyone around them. Before we dive into today's discussion, I'd like to share a little bit about our organization. Now, at the heart of Michelson IP lies the objective of diversifying the innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem by ensuring that more people are aware of the value of their creations. We are committed to democratizing IP education to ensure that all people from all backgrounds are able to identify their IP, register it, and build generational wealth for themselves and their communities. That is why we are committed to partnering with 2- and 4-year educational institutions to make sure that people from all ages and walks of life are exposed to intellectual property education. To get the word out on the value of IP, however, we must meet people where they are and as they're creating to ensure that their stories are told and that their creations remain their own. However, we don't do this alone. Michelson IP has some incredible partners in this space who we'd like to thank. And in particular, we're grateful for our continued partnership with NACE. You might have seen or learned about this webinar through that community. And so for several years, we've been lucky enough to reach thousands of students and educators through this partnership. And more specifically, through the business and entrepreneurship courses for the educators who teach those courses. And ultimately, that sets a lot of these students up for essentially a whole new world that's going to rely on creativity, no matter whether it's for sale or part of the work that you're doing, maybe in a particular business that you're employed at. So it's our hope that you are inspired by this conversation in this session to join our community of educators. If you have any questions during the course of this session, we invite you to please use the Q&A feature. There'll be a Q&A section at the end of the webinar. And we also appreciate your feedback. And so there will be a poll at the end of the webinar just to get a sense of how helpful the webinar was for you. So with that, I'm going to dive into the substance of the webinar. So let me just share. All right. So as I mentioned before, my name is Chinwe Ohanale Agwu. I'm the Senior Program Manager for Michelson IP. And so just as a little sort of roadmap for where we're headed today. So I'll touch a little bit about Michelson IP, how it came about, what is the Educator in Residence program. We'll chat through some of the resources that are available for you as you're actually teaching the content, and then we'll close out with the application timeline so that you have a sense of what to expect during that process. So Michelson IP, as I mentioned earlier, provides access to IP education to support budding inventors, entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs, no matter where they are in their journey. So the Institute was actually founded by Dr. Gary Michelson, who is a renowned spinal surgeon who has hundreds, almost 1,000 patents to his name worldwide. And he realized how important it was to ensure that all people were aware of the power of intellectual property. And so he started the Institute with that sole focus in mind to ensure that we could democratize IP education and provide a path for individuals to develop generational wealth for themselves and their communities. A core objective, an objective that really sits at the heart of what we do, is to provide access to high quality IP educational materials that can be leveraged by higher education and eventually K-12 educators. And so I'm sure many of you have heard of IP and intellectual property, and even in the legal space, it's such a niche and it can be very abstract, and maybe a little intimidating. And so the goal of our resources is to remove the intimidation factor, to make the materials as accessible as possible so that anyone can really understand this area, and have the kind of impact that they want to have. And so to do that, our resources were developed in partnership with industry leading professionals and experts. And that was really important because we wanted to make sure that those resources were not only understandable, but they had the clear information that, you know, oh, let me go back. We wanted to make sure that it had the information that uh, is accurate, right? And is able to communicate in a way that students can rely on and educators can rely on. So it was really critical that we partnered with industry professionals and experts. And then those resources are distributed in partnership with organizations that prioritize the education of students for an emerging creativity and innovation-driven economy. So one of our partnerships, as I've mentioned before, is NACI. Another partner is UNCF. And then we have individual partnerships with different institutions who have also opted to use our resources. So while we are developing resources, we can't get any of this to students without partnering with individuals like yourselves. So you are key to the mission at the heart of Michelson IP. So when I talk about resources, this is a great way to sort of get a bird's eye view of what we're talking about. But essentially, we have a catalog of resources that span from course modules to slide presentations to case studies, and quite honestly, much more than this. This is a quick summary of some of the things that you can find. Now, typically the way that we share these resources with our partners currently is you can find them on our website. But when we work with our educators and residents, the resources are provided in a slightly different format so that you can quickly identify which resources might make the most sense for your course or your students. So course modules, I'm sure you're all familiar with LMS sort of cartridges. And so we have Blackboard and Canvas cartridges that are loaded with lesson plans that are easy to plug and play. We also have assessment and discussion questions that sit outside of the LMS sort of cartridge that you can attach to, for example, our audiovisual content that allows you to gauge students' understanding of the material. We also have case studies, and case studies are great because they really take real world examples and break them down into the component parts. They give you some discussion questions to get your students thinking, and then leave you and your students with some takeaways that they can sort of implement as they move forward. We found that the case studies are incredibly powerful for bringing IP to life, especially when things are in the news. So students can readily relate to that content. And then we also have things like slide presentation. So if you wanted to plug it into a section or maybe a module in your course, you can add those slides to maybe the beginning, the middle, and end of your lesson, so that you have something to work off of, a kind of backbone, and then you can enrich the content from there depending on what your course is. So, like I said, this is just a summary of what we have available, but we have, I think, almost 50 different kinds of resources, and counting, because we're constantly evolving the resources to be most helpful to you all, so that you can teach IP quite easily and comfortably. So now that you've kind of heard a little bit about the resources, what is this program, right? As I mentioned before, this is actually an initiative that started in partnership with NACCE directly. And we were thinking, how can we kind of accelerate the number of educators that are able to access these resources and teach to their students, and who might be the right partner. And so, as you can imagine, when you're thinking about creators and entrepreneurs, business and entrepreneurship courses are, top of mind. And because NACCE convenes quite a number of educators who teach entrepreneurship, it was a perfect fit. But now we're trying to expand, our partnerships and relationships. And so this is an opportunity for us to welcome more people into the educator in residence community. So when we talk about educators in residence, essentially what we are talking about is an educator who is teaching a course, typically semester, but sometimes quarterly, depending on your institution. And you are taking some of the resources that are listed in our resource catalog, and you are integrating it into a course. And so the primary objective of an educator in residence is to teach the IP materials in your course. While, yes, we do work with a lot of educators who are teaching business or entrepreneurship courses, we've also seen really successful integrations in fashion courses and music courses. We've also seen someone who teaches a choreography course implement this. We've seen creative design teaching this course. The course has also been implemented in a master's level architecture course. So there's no limitation when it comes to what kind of course this material can be taught in. And we also do not limit educators to integrating to only one course. In fact, most of our educators will teach multiple courses in a semester. And on average, they integrate our resources into 3 or more courses, depending on the number of courses they teach. So we actually heavily encourage educators get creative and see how intellectual property interacts with their course material, and introducing students to the material. So the first and primary objective is really to teach. The second is how we are constantly evolving the material. So, you know, this initiative has been around for almost a decade, and I'm sure you can imagine how much technology and innovation has evolved just over the last couple of years, let alone the last decade. So one of the ways that we are able to maintain, you know, some more current resources is that the educators will pick 1 or 2 classes of resources to update or modify. So what that might mean is we have an educator right now who is creating a case study based off of some really interesting fact pattern that he stumbled upon in the film industry, and so is working in partnership with another colleague to develop that case study. We have individuals who will take PowerPoint presentations and perhaps update the examples to something that might be industry specific. And that's actually a really, really great way to add more resources, because intellectual property is so vast and abstract. The best way to sort of ground it is to, anchor it to an industry. So intellectual property, like copyrights, for example, in music or film, is going to have a completely different sort of feel than, let's say, if you're talking about architecture, where there might be some different considerations. Now, at no point does this require you to be an expert. Even when I'm talking about examples or the differences in industry, really what we're looking for is maybe different examples, right? So in music, an obvious example in copyright might be a song, but in architecture, for copyright, it might be the drawing that you do in architecture. So those are two different examples of the same IP, which is copyright, and doesn't require you to, study, intellectual property, but you can at least give a different example based off of the definitions that we provide. So really, this is taking the resources that we currently have, and modifying them, or working, in tandem or in collaboration, with maybe some other colleagues who are also interested in this area to develop something new. Now, when it comes to objective number 2, we leave this to you, to sort of decide what it is you're going to contribute. Because again, we want to make sure that the contributions are things that educators feel comfortable contributing. And ultimately, the goal is the resources that are created and contributed go back into the catalog so that future educators are able to utilize those resources. The last thing I'll say about this is that while we do have formal partnerships with educators and residents and some institutions, we have a number of educators who just come to our platform looking for resources to teach their courses. So there are many more educators who we don't have a formal relationship with that we are actually developing these resources for. We want to make sure that everyone, all educators, no matter where they are, will be able to find a resource that will speak to them. And so that's why the Educator in Residence program is a unique opportunity to kind of give back to the educator community, so that we can constantly support and build each other up, especially when it comes to sharing IP education with our students. Thirdly, and I think this is one of the newer components of the Educator in Residence program, is reflecting. So one of the things that we hope to do is to constantly collect feedback on how the resources are doing. And so you can pay it forward by sharing your experience, not only in the program, but also with the resources themselves. And so at the conclusion of the Educator in Residence program, there are two things that we ask our EIRs to do. One, we ask that you incentivize your students to take a feedback survey, which basically asks them, what they thought of the resources that they had access to. Were all the resources helpful or not helpful? What did they come away from the resources with? And some of the ways we've seen the surveys be incentivized is, maybe if you give extra credit in your course, maybe doing the survey is extra credit, or it counts as one attendance. We've also seen that the teachers or educators will give equivalent points to maybe one class attendance or something like that, basically anchoring taking the survey to some point system, right? And then the second thing that we ask is that the educators themselves complete a feedback survey. And this takes the place of formal reporting. So in the past, the educators and residents would, present like a formal report to us. But we know that educators have a lot on their plate, especially at the end of the semester when you're busy trying to grade and finalize, projects and things like that. So we thought if we could streamline the process for you, then it would make it a bit easier to get feedback. And so essentially what we did was we created a survey form that collects information for us so that we can get a good sense of how the semester went. Some things that we really care about are things like how many classes you integrated the material in, which materials did you use, did you find the materials helpful, how many students on average. We don't ask for exact numbers because maybe you don't have them, but a close enough estimate to the number of students that you taught the material to. So things like that. And then we also ask, how you felt about the program itself, if there's any feedback you have for us so that we can constantly improve the program. So first priority is to teach the material. The second is to sort of pour back into the resource catalog with some updated resources, inspired maybe by your particular community, your industry. And then finally, we ask that you reflect on the experience and help the students reflect as well. By completing the two surveys so that we can also make sure that we're constantly evolving and that we're constantly growing to meet the needs of both students and educators. So when we're talking about the Educator in Residence program, there's really four things or four stages to the program. So onboarding is what will happen after educators are selected. And that's typically when we're collecting all the paperwork necessary, confirming that you'll be available for things like the cohort meeting, and then you have the ability to do the surveys and all of that. And we'll typically schedule a one-on-one session with you just to go over any final details, any questions you might have. And that's like the final stage to make sure you're good to go. And it's also when we will collect all information necessary for issuing the payment for acting as an educator in residence. So that is very important. And when onboarding emails go out, we please ask that you are mindful of the deadlines so that we can make sure that, all the payments and things like that go out on time. So after that, we'll have a cohort meeting. So we've met with you, but your cohort are the other educators who are going through this process with you at the same time. And so we only mandate one meeting because, again, we know that you all are incredibly busy, but we will provide contact details for all other educators so that if you want to contact or communicate with other cohort members throughout the Educator in Residence program, you're more than welcome to. We find that some cohorts like to meet more than others, and instead of mandating it as a part of the program, again, because work and scheduling can be quite hectic, we want to empower the cohort to kind of set their own cadence. And so we just make sure that you all have an opportunity to meet each other and introduce yourselves to one another before the semester starts. Then once the semester starts, we ask that's when you implement your teaching strategy, you use the resources, maybe you let students know that, the student survey will be coming out after your particular module or maybe towards the end of the semester. So that is when the teaching and all of that takes place. Now, once the semester ends, we we'll give about 30 days after the semester for you to submit sort of your deliverables, right? And so for us, the deliverables are the educator feedback survey and the asset or the resource that you are going to create. And so those will be submitted to us. So the survey is automatic because you'll get a link to that. And then the asset that you're developing will be emailed to us. So that'll be 30 days after the semester ends that those items will be due. All right. So hopefully, you're now excited and you're asking, well, how, what's the application timeline? What's the process look like? So applications open today. And because you signed up for the webinar, you actually have exclusive access to the application before anyone else. The application will go live for everyone, including on our website, by next week. But those who sign up for the webinar will get access to the application first. Then April 10th is when the application closes. So you have approximately, I think that's 3 or 4 weeks to submit your application. Hopefully, many of you will be putting in your applications today. But essentially, the applications open today and they close April 10th. So those are 2 important dates to keep in mind. Then in terms of selection, we have 5 positions open. So and this is for the fall 2025 academic calendar. So fall 2025 is the semester that we are selecting for. And for that semester, we are looking at 5 educators in residence. The plan is to notify all 5 educators in residence who've been selected by April 20th. Now, between April 20th and May 9th, all your paperwork must be submitted. If we do not have all your paperwork submitted by May 9th, you will unfortunately be disqualified. And part of this is because we need to make sure that all the payments and all the processing gets done on time. And I'm sure you've worked at institutions, you're at educational institutions, right? So you know that some things take time. And so we want to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where, because paperwork is submitted late, payments go out late, and then, the educator is not able to start the semester, at the right time. So we just want to make sure that everything gets done by May 9th. So please, 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 help us make sure that that gets done by submitting everything by May 9th if you're selected for an educator in residence program. Then finally, on May 26th, we will make a formal announcement. So typically this will take the form of a press release. So we have another program called the HBCU Futures Collaborative, which is similar. And for both of them, press releases go out. So the press release for the HBCU program that's for the spring just went out earlier this year. And so in a similar way for the EIR program, we will do a press release and make a formal announcement about the educators and residents who have been selected. So that will be great because you can share with your colleagues about this wonderful opportunity that you're receiving to teach IP education. So that is the application timeline and process. And just to reiterate, as thanks for taking on this incredible work and also, contributing your time to developing resources and sharing feedback, each educator in residence will receive a $5,000 grant in furtherance of this work. So quite a lot of the paperwork that I'm talking about is to facilitate some of that. So to facilitate the payment of that. So that is the application timeline. And hopefully that has given you a good sense of the educator in residence program as well. So now that we've gone through the program and the application process, we'd love to learn if this has been helpful. And remember, I did say there was going to be a poll. So in a moment, there will be a pop-up on your screen with a poll. And it shouldn't take more than a couple of seconds. But we ask that you provide your feedback so that we can ensure that this webinar is helpful. And then once that's completed, we'll move on to the Q&A section. So I'll give you all a quick second. Got a few more people to go. I think we're more than halfway. Okay, so while the rest of you are finishing the poll, I'm gonna hop over to Q&A. So just so that you all have it in case you do have any questions. This is my contact email. So if you do have questions during the application process, you can reach myself or my colleague, Whitley Crawford, and we will do our best to answer any of your questions. So with that, let's see what questions popped up in the Q&A. Is the Educator in Residence program open to four-year institutions and only community colleges? So that's a great question. It is open to four-year institutions as well. So if you're at a two-year institution or a four-year institution, you're more than welcome to apply to the Educator in Residence program. Must applicants be fully employed by community college or university? So I'm assuming this question might apply to adjunct professors. So if you're an adjunct professor or lecturer, you're more than welcome to apply. The only requirement to be an educator in residence is that you are teaching courses at the university. I will add that our preference is to work with educators who are teaching two or more courses, but there's no requirement that you be a full-time educator to apply. And if that's not quite what you meant, feel free to add another question or add clarification. Will we receive a copy of the presentation? So this is another good question. A recording of the webinar will be sent out in a recap email. So you will get access to the recording, which will have the slides. And then you'll also get a link to the application in the recap email as well. Okay, someone is asking I mentioned there's some sort of payment. What is the fee for the application? So there is no fee to apply to the Educator in Residence program. There's no fee to apply for the program. We are the ones that are compensating educators for their time. So it's a grant that you will receive for taking the time to teach and develop the resources and all of that. Okay. Here's another question. I teach at a private four-year college and have a class every other fall term on intellectual property. I teach it this fall. I'm an adjunct, but my EIR would be for the four-year institution, but I would be willing to complete this for the junior college. Tim Brooks, I'm not sure that I understand the question. I think what you're asking is that you teach at a four-year institution and a community college, but you want to apply for the Educator in Residence program for the junior college. Either one is fine. We don't have any restrictions on whether you can teach a course at the 4-year or 2-year institution. But if that doesn't answer your question and it needs a little bit more nuance, you're also welcome to email us if you need to provide a little bit more information, or if you can provide more information here. Okay. Um, um, Jane Tolkington, I don't know if this is a question. You mentioned that you're currently using Caterpillar IP training materials and supplementing with Michelson videos. Are you asking if you can still apply to the Educator in Residence program? Maybe if you could add a little bit more to the question, I might be able to answer that one. Oh, okay. You were just introducing yourself. It's lovely to meet you. Okay. I see some questions in the chat as well. Is this open for Asian nationals? So what I would say is this is a grant for educators. So there's 2 ways that you can receive payment. You will either receive payment through your institution. So let's say you're a professor, I'm in California, you're a professor at the University of Southern California. We would pay the University of Southern California the $5,000 and it would make its way through the finance department and then they would pay you. Or you'd be paid as an independent contractor. So the payment would come directly to you and then you would teach the course. So your nationality is not the concern. I think that the concern is from a payment standpoint, are you able to receive payments? But that may be something that I would say email us. Because I think there's a couple of pieces in there that we'd need to sort of suss out. How much is the stipend? The stipend is $5,000, and it will be paid in 2 parts. So you'll receive the first half after we've received all your payment, and should be before your first cohort meeting. And then the second payment will be paid out to you after we receive your feedback survey and the asset that you've developed. You are not required to present at a conference. That is not a requirement. Are there any other questions? I think I've answered all of them, but if I have not answered your question, please feel free to drop it in the chat or in the Q&A so I make sure I see it. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. So again, if you do have any other questions, is the application to be per educator or can they be a group of educators? So if you apply as a group of educators for one institution, and this has happened before, we had 2 educators who applied, you are taking one spot. So that means you would share the stipend. So we don't have any issues with you applying as a group, but know that because you're applying as a group, you would take one position because there's only five positions. And that means that $5,000 stipend for that position would be split amongst your group. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay. If you have any other questions, like we mentioned before, please feel free to email us. be happy to clarify or answer any of your questions. I hope that today's session was informative, hopefully inspiring, gets you excited, and also left you better equipped to go through the application, become an educator in residence, and support your aspiring students. As we mentioned, the application for this cohort of educators in residence will open following this webinar and will close April 10th. You can access the application either going to our website or following the link in the email that you'll receive after the webinar. We will be dropping the link to the application in the chat now for those who want to get started on the application. The application should not take you that long, but you might want to think through, which courses you want to apply the resources to and which resources you'll want to use. So, take your time to go through the application. A link to the recording and the slides shared will also be included in the email that I mentioned previously. If you'd like to learn more about our work generally in the intellectual property space, we invite you to visit our website using the link that's going to be dropped in the chat. Additionally, if you or your organization wants to become a part of our work focused on supporting the democratization of IP education and diversifying the innovation ecosystem, please reach out to me personally at chinwe@20mm.org. You can also stay engaged by signing up for our newsletter at michelsonip.com to receive news and updates about our program, as well as our other events and other programs. Thank you again for joining us. This has been great. Thank you for your questions, your comments. It's been wonderful to see so many people excited about our Educator in Residence program. And we hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.